So in this video, what we're going to be doing is generating fake data with a set false positive rate, and then we're going to be using that for inference. So that's going to be a somewhat fancier version than what you were required to do on the midterm, because it's going to reproduce the kind of the appearance of the predictions and the test labels exactly. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. So we're going to say, okay, so fake pred. And this is going to be a function, and it's going to take test A, and sorry, just test, and it's going to take pred, and it's going to take an FPR, some kind of rate. Okay? So what am I trying to do here? I'm trying to say, okay, like, here's a test vector and keep it the same. Here's the prediction vector, and you'll see what we use that for. And now generate something that looks kind of like that, but different. And make sure that the false positive rate on average is going to be this number FPR. Okay, so we'll see examples in a second. So how are we going to go about it? Well, what we need to do is we need to create some positives and some negatives, right? So let's just do that. So I'll say the number of positives, that's just going to be sum of test equals to 1. Okay. So the number of negatives is going to be a sum of test equal to 0. And now what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, all right, so now let's generate fake labels. So how do we generate fake labels? We would say, well, we know the FPR, but we don't know the FNR. So the FNR will just estimate. So the FNR is going to be the sum, and that's going to be the same way that we computed the FPR in the first place, right? So actually, let's just do FNR. We pretend that we implemented this function. So it's going to be FNR of test and pred. And here's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to generate a new pred vector based. So here we use this in order to compute the FNR. So I'm going to generate a new pred vector. So how I'm going to do it? I'm going to say, okay, so fake neg labels. So by default, this should be 0, except it's going to be 1 with probability of PR, right? Because the false positive rate is like, what percentage of the time do we say positive to negative? Okay, so I'm going to say, okay, so it's going to be albino. And I'm going to say that we need how many of those? And neg of those. And we're going to say the size is 1. And the probability is going to be, so what's the probability of a 1? The probability of a 1 is going to be FPR. So prob is going to be FPR. Okay? So if the FPR, for example, is 1/3, right? So if the FPR is 1/3 and that's given, then what we might generate is something like 1000, or maybe 010, or maybe sometimes it would be like 011, right? Because like it doesn't say that 1/3 exactly would be 1 always, but it's going to be something like that. And on average, you'll have 1 1 and 2 zeros, although that of course would vary. That's the whole point of generating random stuff. So in the same way, we'll generate the fake positive labels. So that's going to be our binom, and the n is going to be n pos, and the size is going to be 1, because every time we want like either 0 or 1, so that means size 1. Because if size were greater, then we would be kind of attempting multiple trials, so we get like things that are not zeros and ones. And now the probability is going to be FNR. 1 minus FNR actually, because we want the probability of a 1 to be 1 minus, the probability of a 1 is 1 minus FNR, because the probability of a 0 there is FNR. Okay, so that's going to be 1 minus FNR. So, okay, so now, and this is really kind of too fancy. You did not need to do this on the midterm, but you could if you wanted to, right? So what you could say is, okay, all right, so my new pred so let's call it pred fake. So let's start by just making it pred. And what I'll then do is I'll say pred fake at test equals to 0 is going to be fake neg lab. And pred fake at test equals to 1 is going to be fake pause lab. And now I'm ready to return pred fake. So what did I do here? So I said, okay, so let's generate the predictions for the negatives. And those predictions are mostly going to be 0, except with probability FPR, they're going to be 1. And let's generate predictions for the positives, and they're going to be mostly 1, hopefully, assuming that the FNR is low, but sometimes with probability FNR, they're going to be 0. Okay? And now let's take pred fake, and initially it's going to just be pred. So initially I'll just say, well, like, make it this, whatever. I'm going to overwrite all of that. And now I'm going to say, okay, so if this is fake pred, I'm going to say, okay, all right, so wherever test is 1, so here, here, and here, assign the fake pause lab things, right? So there's 3 of those, so in those 3 positions, I'll assign the labels for the positives. In those 3 positions, where the test is 0s, I'll assign the fake neg lab. And now I'll have a new fake prediction vector, which is going to look just like pred A or pred B. It's going to correspond to the test vectors, but it's going to be fake. It's going to be fake, and it's going to have the same FNR as pred A and pred B, or whatever it is that the input is, and the FPR is going to be set. Okay? So that's kind of like the fancy way of doing this. This would generate the kind of a pred that looks just like those kinds of preds. In the next video, I'll show how to do it in a simpler way.